was floating. They kicked Steve Jobs out of Apple right around that time, actually. So because he was being a tyrant.
Yeah, but what did he return later or
Yeah, they
something?
brought him back in because it went because he was like he was the firebrand to make it happen. You know? But he started another thing the next computer, and they were doing the same type of thing around it. Then it was and they always pump this AI, they've been pumping this AI idea forever, and it's like it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's just a mechanism. To me, this is my opinion. But it's the organic part of it is us interacting with it.
Yeah, I think essentially this sort of scientific approach in the first place, reductionist approach, it would never be able to create a true intelligence because it doesn't. Uh, it only looks at the external manifestations rather than of life, for example, rather than something else,
Yeah,
which is the source of these manifestations.
right.
It always kind of, I don't know, it actually kind of, I get angry when I read like, oh, we finally understand how, I don't know, how cells differentiate, and that is their differentiation is controlled by this gene. Well, so what? I mean, it's just it's just like, okay, so what controls the gene in the first place?
Oh, right. Yeah,
That
the
kind of
gene is the
questions. Like,
answer. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like you certainly like discovered some, uh, well, again, like some manifestation, something that accompanies this process, but you haven't really understood the reason or
Right, right, right,
where
right.
it comes from in the first place.
Uh, well, that I mean, the one that comes to mind immediately, and you'll have a lot more insight into it than I have, but it's like the Higgs boson seems that way to me.
Yeah, well, maybe, but yeah, we've actually had this discussion with Michael Claridge at a dinner party,
Hmm.
this OTF conference. So I told him that somehow there is I would say there's a large tendency in physics to somehow physicists are really almost obsessed with the kind of dynamics. And what I mean by that is that they're not they're not happy about having, like axioms or constants. Like, for example, like we have, like, well, let's say 100 particles with different masses. So physicists aren't happy with just having these masses as, constants, like parameters of the theory. They want these masses to be a consequence of some dynamic process,
Uh-huh.
because somehow they think that it makes it better. But I have no idea why. I mean, it's just you're just adding additional step, but you're not, that step doesn't really lead you to the
The
reason.
essence.
It's just another step. You're actually overcomplicating the picture, because
Right, right, right.
for, like, you've had these 100 masses as constants, but then you said, okay, well, maybe these masses are generated through this interaction with the Higgs field. Okay, so you introduce the Higgs field, and what you end up with is 100 constants of interaction with Higgs field that generate 100 masses. But and plus you have the Higgs field. So instead of 100 objects, you now have 101 objects. So is it any better? Uh,
Yeah.
and it's just, I don't know. It's just not a very healthy approach in the first place.
Right, right. That, I mean, the Rube Goldberg aspect of all this stuff. I mean, it
Yeah, yeah,
seems.
and
Yeah.
I kind of have the same feeling. Well, okay, there's another manifestation of the same principle, which is this gauge theory, like what I briefly mentioned in my talk, this local gauge invariance principle, where you're kind of not happy of having the field in the first place, but you dynamically generate this field through something else. Well, it would require, you know, a couple of lectures to explain how exactly that works. But in a nutshell, what they're saying is we're having some functions, like mathematical functions of these field variables. But what if we kind of modify them in coordinate dependent manner, which means we would modify them in each point of space differently. So that's what kind of the initial question. And next thing is they introduce this principle that says, well, nothing should change if we do that. And in order to kind of bring it back, I understand that it sounds very abstract, but in order to bring it back to where it was before you introduced this modification, you introduced the field that kind of turns back these phases that you've added, so to speak. And that kind of supposedly that is the mechanism of the how these fields appear in the first place. But that's such a, I don't know, such a complicated approach that, but again, the same principle of kind of, you know, dynamic generation of something is present here too. I don't know if that made any sense, but I mean, yeah, that's a pretty complicated question in the first place. So it's not really surprising that if I wasn't able to, you know, kind of give any decent description of it.
This thing I've seen quite a bit. You know? I mean,
yeah, it's an abstract function, mathematical function that, well, numerically it corresponds to the energy. I mean, in terms of dimension. And actually, you know, for mechanical systems, I think it's the difference between kinetic energy and potential energy. I mean, just you take the kinetic energy minus potential energy, and that's your Lagrangian.
Okay.
But it's a key function in all the theoretical mechanics and that kind of stuff, and field theory too. It basically contains everything you have in your theory, like, for example, the energy of particles, the energy of the interaction between particles, and that kind of stuff. And then you can get equations of motion by taking differentials of this Lagrangian.
That's weird, because I was just looking at this exact same thing like 15 minutes ago. But it's weird. Yeah, it really was. But I have to go because my cousin's here with this bed, and I guess Buddy's stopping over here. So
tell him we said hi.
I'll tell him. So it was nice talking to you guys. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
So I don't know. Should we continue?
Yeah. I love the conversation. So.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add that I have the same problem of, you know, adding an additional step with, for example, this panspermia idea. Like people say, like, oh, basically there's saying that we don't understand where life comes from. I mean, how it appears. So let's say it just came from another planet. Well, guess what? You still haven't explained where it appeared.
Where it start, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of stupid.
But then it gets into sequence and time. You know, that's the one that is interesting to try to like unpack. You know.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Time, because time. That's the one that I've always been attracted to. You know, since a kid. Like, what is. Like the idea of timelessness and time. You can think of things that are timeless, like the idea of eternity. Just the idea, just the time doesn't exist. Anyway, but we base. I don't know. Does it exist? Because all you then it gets philosophical fast.
Well, I mean, it should be, you know.
It's not.
Uh,
It's
yeah, but
it's
what?
apples to oranges as far as having it in having it in a spatial reference and then using time as there's apples to oranges kind of thing going on.
But well, I don't quite understand what you mean. And why do you think time shouldn't exist?
I'm not saying it shouldn't exist. I'm saying what's the nature of it? You know, I mean, it's a huge, you know, just massive question to me. We can measure all over the place. We can measure, okay, here's where we started, here's where we finished, here's the velocity, here's the acceleration, here's the jerk, here's all this. Keep on deriving it, you know, if you want. You can go, you can name it. You can have names up to infinity on those derivatives, you know, and they can all be nonlinear.
Yeah, but well, I think what you're talking about, it kind of relates to a more general problem of what we consider to be an explanation, because, well, and I've long advocated the idea that essentially what we're dealing with, I mean, we humans, is just stories. You know, we tell each other stories about the world. So science is exactly that. It's a bunch of stories how world works, you know.
Right.
So it kind of, what would you, and that's not a question for you, but it's kind of a general question.
Yeah.
What would people consider to be an explanation? I mean, people think that, well, okay, that's sort of a separate issue. I mean, the question of whether, you know, the absolute truth exists or not. But supposedly, kind of the explanation would be some sort of story that cannot be disproven by anything else, you know, some sort of absolute true story.
Right. Can you name
that wouldn't,
one?
Yeah, that wouldn't contradict anything else.
Can you
name
one story that's that way?
No, I don't think so. I think everything can be
disassembled.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Deconstructed.
Right, deconstructed.
As they say.
Yeah.
But and it all boils down to that question. I mean, what do we consider an explanation? And that's, again, I believe it's a deeply kind of political aspect of science, where some people would settle for one type of explanation, and the other people would say, well, that's just stupid, let's invent something else. I mean, we don't like that kind of story, and so on. So, like, for example, I've had a discussion in the comments, I think it was in the Thunderbolts group on Facebook, like somebody asked, and I'm just trying to use that example kind of to elucidate my point, more general point. So somebody asked, like, why do the positive and negative charges attract, or something like that? And well, I've asked, well, I mean, is there something wrong with it? I mean, it's kind of a really simple story, yeah, that you have positives and negatives and they attract, but the same type of charges they repel, right? So it's a really simple story.
It's because you say because they do. The answer is because they do.
Yeah, so you have only a couple of objects and really simple properties of those objects.
Right.
But the guy obviously wasn't satisfied with that. He wanted some other story, kind of to have this story as its consequence.
Right.
Again, he wanted to make this another step. Well, I'm not sure if it's reasonable. I mean, you would probably end up with something much more complicated.
Well, then it gets into what's a good story. You know, I mean, is it compelling? I mean, then it gets into art fast. You know?
Yeah, but
I think.
Well, I wouldn't say so. I mean,
okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, you would most likely end up with something really esoteric, I would say, like something really complex, so that only few people would understand. Like this, again, this whole
the yin yang thing comes in nicely. I like that one, and I like compression and rarefication. I like that one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, but anyway, the point I'm making is that there is an explanation which just sounds like you have positive and negative charges and they attract. That's
we observe
one
them
explanation.
And they do it.
That's one story. Yeah, but you can probably invent other stories that would also, in the end, give you the same results, but and there's just no stopping to it. I mean, you can go as complex as you want, but the question is it reasonable? I mean, and so
But
on.
it depends your approach when you're doing, but like when you're doing something, the approach to it and how you consider what it is, it affects the outcome of what the act of doing something is, what the output is, what the result of your endeavor is. To me, it happens to me. So.
Hmm. And I believe it actually has a lot of connections to this Gödel's theorem, like, which basically states that you have to have some input, like some axioms, because otherwise your stories would not just wouldn't work. You cannot, or to put it otherwise, you cannot you cannot tell a story that would be self-sufficient entirely.
Yeah, but they're cold. They end up being cold, like postulates and axioms. They end up being cold and what's the right word for it? Clinical, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sterile.
Sterile is actually a better word. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I understand what you mean, but I think people already recognize that it is impossible to go on without them. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Because
right.
It would just
but if you
fall
like
apart.
for instance, if you I'm intrigued by Juan Cassiano's theory. He's got an infinity theory that he's writing a book on, and Jim and him have been back and forth, and over the years actually.
What's it about? Can you tell a bit more?
But it's basically the idea of compression and rarefication, and that is a fundamental matter in motion. And he doesn't go like to the point of like going into like consciousness per se at all, and he's kind of a atheistic materialist. But this fundamental idea of compression and rarefication, all the way down, scaling all the way down and scaling all the way up, in time, I find appealing, just as far as a base point, you know.
Well, then again, it
because
kind of
disturbance.
relates.
It's a disturbance of like if you think of everything as the fundamental point is equilibrium of what, and then there's a disturbance to it, and then all of a sudden you get all the.
But I
if you think of it on all scales, it's like the harmonics go all over the place, and then all of a sudden you could if you can have condensation into matter, and then out radiation out from, all of a sudden there's a picture starts to form to me.
Yeah, but I think you can recognize easily that there's a lot of basically postulates there, and axioms, and so on.
Well, he's a materialist.
You have to postulate that matter exists. You have to postulate that time exists. You have to postulate that, well, that equilibrium exists, and somehow equilibrium is something, special, which all of these points are not obvious. And I would say I can think of like the infinite number of other theories that wouldn't require that. Well, at least, would be different in many respects. So, yeah.
We're going to come up with a solid answer, right?
What do you mean?
No, I mean, this whatever we're experiencing and kind of seeing. Okay, we're going to look at this from a different perspective, and then talk about it. The motivations of, like, the one that's like I find really appealing is the electric geology, because to me the model is kind of that is within academia, of tectonic movement, etc., and then non electromagnetic influence is it's time for it to be overturned to me.
We just have to assemble a couple of black boxes. That's again the term from Bruno Latour philosophy. Like, we have to construct a couple of stories that would be very solid, inside, that you cannot, I mean, sort of, in order to justify the fundamentals of electric geology, you have to make them work inside of one of these black boxes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that the very fact that the black box works kind of indicates that the electric geology is true.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
right.
For example, like, I don't know, just random example, like general relativity kind of got a lot of points in his support because it assembled a few of those boxes. Like, for example, the the, how do they call it? Well, again, supposedly gravitational lensing around the sun, that was one. Then the anomalous, precession of Mercury perihelion, that was the other one, and so on. So the, how do you call it? Time dilation in the gravitational field of Earth, that was the third one, and so on. So all these kind of indicate that general relativity is correct, and therefore, well, it's okay to use it, and so on and so forth. But without those points, it would be just a detached theory.
Right. But it ends up being a deification and a religious thing. I mean, although I find the biggest hypocrisy in the thing is it presents itself as not that. It's a belief system. And with high priests and the deities.
But that's just how culture works.
But right, but
and everything works that way.
Is that acceptable?
Well, I'm more than sure that if you were going to, like, I don't know how to say, like, if like electric geology or something like that succeeds, it would be the same with it too. Eventually.
Like does the who matter?
Don't exactly know what you mean.
This was, I mean, like general relativity. It's, you immediately think of Einstein, right? It's like it's the person,
yeah.
Yeah,
but there's a, I mean, there's a fundamental, some sort of very frequently observed patterns of how these, power ensembles arrange, and you can see that everywhere, I think.
Yeah.
And so I would say that a lot of what you hate about, say, mainstream science now would be also applicable to
it happens again, right? I mean, right. The classic line that's meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right?
Sort of like that, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it's just well, again, there's a lot of how do you say it, like analogies in politics. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, like people have been trying to develop some sort of system of governance to get rid of, recurring tyrannical systems, So the best that people came up with was parliament, essentially, that would, allow the government to change periodically so that nobody can usurp the whole power of it, and so on.
Right.
So I think that maybe, well, that's basically, my point is that's basically the only more or less successful tool that we have in order to prevent, solidification of that sort, kind of political solidification. So I would say that maybe sometime in the future we would have sort of a parliamentary type science or something like that. I mean, it sounds stupid, yeah, I understand that,
Like by consensus?
perhaps something like that, yeah. Um,
What about
I don't
spectral?
know.
What about if
I'm
it's
just
spectral, where you go wherever you want, and if you get something to work, maybe.
yeah, but that's exactly what uh, parliamentary politics is about. Like one person votes for one party, the other votes for other
But
party, and so on.
but
That's how it
it forces
works.
but once again, each one is its own cult. Like, I mean, I see that this here, and they play it.
Yes,
That
yes,
the whole
but
idea of
that's
they get they
uh,
polarize, and then this is a method of separation.
excuse me, but unfortunately, the only alternative to that is tyranny, and
I,
that's tyranny of one of them,
is it
which is not really a good option, I would say.
anarchy?
Uh, well, that's a more complicated
I,
stuff. Yeah,
I mean, this is
yeah, like
the
fundament.
classic line from Plato goes, it goes, the philosopher king, which is almost not impossible, right? That's that, and then it goes monarchy and oligarchy, and then it goes what you're proposing down level, and then tyranny. One tyranny follows after democracy, because at least that's his theory.
Yeah, well, tyranny does not contradict democracy. In fact, I
It
would
doesn't.
say,
It actually, yeah, it's a natural next step.
yeah, and actually, democracy contradicts anarchy in a way,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
what anarchy is, well, at least well, I would say not even anarchy, but liberalism probably is a better term. I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
I know,
I mean, the meaning of we have it's got such a negative connotation, but anarchy means no rule, right? I mean, it's like,
yes,
yeah,
exactly. So, but I would say that liberalism is fundamentally anarchistic in its basic premises. Like basically the idea is that you can do whatever you want with your life, and nobody has the right to influence your life except you. So, but that's again, that's anarchy.
hmm
But democracy says no. Like if you have enough votes, if we have enough votes, we can do with your life whatever we want.
right. But there's
Uh,
the collective. This is where it gets Jungian fast. But there's a collective consciousness thing, and then you get into ancestral consciousness, and then what's the power of that? And they collect like the hive mind thing, and this ends up being a pretty powerful natural thing, I believe, that should be taken into account.
yeah, but I don't know. Like fundamentally, I would say that like free market is the way. Like so, it would be cool if we could arrange the everything in such a way that you can basically use whatever picture of the world you like, and in particular, what you can adhere to whatever scientific system you like, and another person might do the same, with maybe some other theory or the same as you, and so on. But unfortunately, we have some challenges to deal with, so it's I don't know, but maybe it is achievable. I'm not sure.
It's an interesting thing to be embracing.
Like for example, socialists, they really enjoy talking about these large scale problems that supposedly a big government would help you solve, like for example, like I don't know, vaccinations, climate change, whatever.
Right.
So they're trying to get power from that, and I'm not sure if anarchists have something to answer to these issues. Like, I mean, maybe if you think about it, you would see that free market can solve these problems, but you have to think about that, you see, which is not really applicable to the majority.
What,
Uh,
what if you go back to the tribalism?
like, do you think it might be a
I
solution?
think it exists. I think it actually is the underlying underpinning of
Yeah,
everything.
I, I would say that we can probably go there, but it would require the colonization of space, essentially, because I mean, basically, space is infinite. So you can have on one planet or whatever, one asteroid, whatever the hell you like it to be there, whatever political / religious / ideological system you like. And you have a completely different system on another asteroid, and if you don't like it on one of them, you can just move to the other, and so on. Which is, kind of in a way resembles the early United States,
Well,
like,
the intriguing thing that keeps coming up for me is since we've been so, kind of immersed in this Newtonian model that is the foundation of our current, where you've certainly gone, very high on the in relation to the general public. So you kind of sitting there on a peak, looking over everything. The intriguing information to me is okay, what happened there at the Royal Society, and then the indicators are that this was all conjured, this mechanistic view, and it was a type of enslavement of consciousness. There was an enlightenment of some type that may go back all the way into Egypt and then prehistory, and the ones that ring to me these days are Rudolf Steiner and Edgar Cayce, and then Walter Russell. What the fuck was he talking about? So those are the things that are like kind of giving me juice these days. And I know it's edgy, but it's like they're intriguing to me. What happened there?
Well, intuitively, I feel something pathological about it, so I'm very skeptical.
How so?
But
because I'm interested in that assessment.
What do you mean?
Pathological.
Which one? Oh, well, I don't know. I've had this idea. I'm not sure if I've ever told you about that one. That of sort of like a quantization of ideas. Mm-hmm. And it might sound pretty stupid, but what I mean by that is that I think there is only so much, like there's a certain digitality, I would say, about ideas. Like you can have one idea and you can have other idea, but there's no continuum in between them, and I believe that what these guys are saying is just, they just jump from one idea to the other. But I'm not sure if it means that this other idea is correct. That's what I'm saying. So, and it kind of...
discontinuity.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. But my point is that, okay, so for example, some people claim that it is very strange that many people adhere to similar ideas. Like, for example, like what we have in our group, like many people like mention, well, again, some ancients, like people like Blavatsky and so on, yeah, who had they all kind of thought in a similar way, like the alchemists and so on. Right. There is a definite kind of cluster of ideas there. So, and supposedly, again, according to some people, it means that it should be true, because there's, so many people are talking about almost like the same things. But my point here is that maybe they're doing that only because there is this discontinuity present. Like they're maybe not satisfied with the ideas promoted by mainstream science, let's say, so they go someplace else, and there's only this other place, to go. So they stay there, and it's not because it is true, but it is because there's just no other.
But is there only one truth? Because it seems like this is just a perspective. It's a point of view. That I'm going to choose this point of view, and it's like you can choose your point of view.
Yeah, sort of like that. Yeah. But again, the point I'm making is that there's just no other place to go for them. Like say if you have maybe, again, returning to this spatial analogy, like if we only have 6 continents or whatever on this planet, then you can only live on one of them, you cannot live in the ocean, at least yet. So
Uh-huh.
so if you're not happy on one of them, you will go to the other one, and it doesn't mean that it is true. It just does mean that there's really only a few options available. That's kind of my point. And kind of when I actually came to that idea of this, quantization, was when we discussed Mandela effect with Adrian D'Amico, one of the Ben's kind
Uh-huh.
of. He's actually his like school friend,
Okay.
but they're kind of still friends to this day. He has this channel Suspect Sky, which is
Okay.
basically about the aliens. It's a pretty
Oh,
big
okay.
big channel.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we actually might make an interview with him at some
Sure.
point.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah, he's a pretty interesting guy, and he definitely knows a lot of kind of shady stuff.
Okay.
Uh, so we were discussing, so we were like sitting at the bar drinking and talking about this Mandela effect,
End of the world.
which is, you know, huh?
Here's a nice title. Sorry,
Uh,
I picked up on the
yeah,
title.
yeah, that's one of the things that Ben promotes recently.
Uh-huh.
This book
Right. Right.
that was classified, and some pages were taken
I took a
from it.
look at. I took a look at it. Yeah. Yep.
Uh, so anyway, you know what Mandela effect is?
Uh-huh.
It's yeah,
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay. So we were discussing that, and I told him that maybe it's this, sort of quantization of ideas in action, essentially. So you have kind of one kind of vague archetype in your, I don't know how to even call it, in your arsenal, so to speak, in your mental treasury, to take from there. And there's another one there. So some people kind of shift Mandela from one to the other so that they think that he died in prison.
Right.
Maybe they're confusing him with someone else or someone or something. So
Uh-huh.
there are, kind of like these sort of, well, again, speaking in Jungian terms, archetypes in culture.
Right.
There's one, there's the other, there's a third one maybe, and so on. So maybe some people somehow place Mandela from one to the other. That's why they think that he died in prison and so on.
Right. Right. And then
So that was
there's examples in like television and stuff that people.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, but then again, it doesn't seem very far-fetched to me. I mean, it requires obviously the existence of something like that. I mean, abstractly speaking, these archetypes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. But I mean, watch this. I mean, just as far as like out there stuff, because I'm intrigued. One of the images that like got me like, I have to find out what's going on here, and it was the hexagon on Saturn, right? It's like that is way too intriguing not to dive full bore into what's going on that thing, and then you start seeing the dynamics of the rings, etc. And it's like, so, and this was back, right when I started diving into it, is like 2010, 11, whenever that thing kind of bubbled around. But you stumble upon David Icke, right? You know who that is? David Icke.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
like lizards.
Lizards,
and so
and right. I mean, and then
I think he actually is among my friends on Facebook.
Oh,
But
really?
I'm not. Yeah,
No, but
I'm not
it's an interesting out there. It's a very out there kind of thing. But his thesis is that all our entire consciousness is projected, and it's projected from Saturn, by the way. And then the deep like memory of what Saturn is, or our exposure to what Saturn, the Chronos, and its time, right? And the mythological power of those archetypes, and it's like there's a rabbit hole, right, to think about. And I'm not saying that I find that it's very highly conspiratorial tinfoil hat idea, but I like entertaining things just for the sake of being able to consider it. And it's like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
but that's kind of, again, I kind of might insert that into my initial idea, and it wouldn't contradict it, because you see, you can have an idea that your consciousness is generated by your body, for example. So it's something internal in a way.
Right.
Or you can have an idea that consciousness is generated by your soul that kind of sits in your body for some time until it, leaves it after you die. And you can have a third idea that your consciousness your body is just a receptor of consciousness that is transmitted from somewhere else.
Right.
And that's pretty much it. You cannot have any other idea about how.
There's three paints. It's like here's red, green, and blue, and then we can make all kinds of paintings out of it.
Yes, but my point is that you can really adhere to only one of those. And there are no, ideas in between.
Right.
Essentially.
Right.
Yeah, I was just trying to, show my point on this example too. So, I think it's not a big surprise.
Well, the purely materialistic view. I mean, this theme I think has immense legs. Just from looking at it if you're going to pitch something in Hollywood, and it's like the hard problem, and it's what Sheldrake brings up. It's like with all the facades and the great halls of academe, they cannot explain one thought.
Yeah, but that's only attacking like one of those three. But you can only do that based on
it's
some other.
It's the one that's in power, for sure. The material, pure, philosophical materialism. That's the religion, and it pronounces itself as the truth with a capital T.
So I would say that I'm not really surprised that it's happening. I mean, I don't think that other two ideas are much better. They're different. I mean, there's like more truth to them or something, because I don't really think there is a truth. Again, I think there are just different stories, which are fundamentally.
Well, what are healthy, and what are we going to be attracted to enjoy life? I mean, it's the pursuit of happiness. That's a nice concept.
Yeah, but right? you can have any of those ideas and be happy with it. I mean,
nihilism. How's that?
Yeah, but
we go zap all over the place.
You can be happy with nihilism.
Can you?
I mean. Yeah, that's kind of one of the possibilities. I mean, that's just one of the modes of operation, I would say, and it's definitely possible.
But you can be happy with suicide too, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah, basically, there's this idea by Ludwig von Mises. This sort of, Austrian economic school thinker. So he has a great book called Human Action, where he tries to validate on a philosophical level, again, the ideas of, libertarianism and things like that. It's not really coherent with respect to modern philosophy, but it's definitely... It falls in line really well with, modern time philosophy. I mean, this kind of classic 17th 19th century philosophy. Mm-hmm. But what he writes there is that essentially human action is always a transaction. So you exchange something to something else, like you exchange your state in the now to some other state of yours in the future, and that's what human action is. Like, mm-hmm. If you're hungry, you don't like that, but you would like to be, well fed. So you go and find food in order to transition from one state into the other, to exchange your uh, hungriness plus your actions to, how do you say it, to get rid of it, basically,
right.
to the state in the future where you would be fed. So that's basically his main idea. So I believe that, yeah, like speaking about suicide, for example, that might be one such transaction. Like if you don't like your life the way it is and you think it would be better to get it over, then you commit suicide. And that's absolutely rational, way of behaving.
Right.
I mean,
You think so?
your fund.
You think rational?
Yes, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
well, according to the picture of the world that you have, I mean, not you specifically, but
No, I know.
the
Right,
person who
yeah.
commits suicide,
Right.
according to their picture of the world, committing suicide would make them better than they were before. That's why they do it. So it's again, it's
well, I hate my life. I hate my life. I hate facing. I hate facing reality.
Yeah. Well,
it's driven by despair, I would say.
There might be infinite reasons for that, but the fundamental conflict is that you are not satisfied. I mean, how should I say it? Like, well, again, you just want to exchange one of your states to the other.
Well, yeah,
and it just so happens that the suicide is, the only possible solution to make this transition.
Right.
Sometimes.
Right.
Some people.
Yeah. I've seen it up close and personal. So.
Yeah, and for example, when people are intoxicated or on drugs or whatever, they behave strangely, not because it's not rational, but because their picture of the world is warped, so that they think that the actions that they undertake in these conditions would make them better off, but it's because of this the let's say of the inadequate evaluation of their situation in the first place, and not because they're doing stupid things because they want to do stupid things, but rather because they think it would make the situation better for them to do these things, But just and it turns out to be stupid or harmful just because the picture of the world that they had was not really adequate. And it might happen, I mean, with even when you're not intoxicated. I mean, at least with alcohol or drugs or whatever. For example, like with, I don't know, religion, your
religious
worldview.
Zealot. Yeah.
Or like when people, well, I don't know, like whatever, like it happens a lot in wartime and so on. Like people might get kind of suicidal, they might just jump onto the enemy bunker to help their friends and so on.
Right.
And
it gets into the good. Have you seen Plotinus and the Neoplatonists at all? What they were talking about?
I'm really not a fan of Plato. So
but the Neoplatonists.
Well, I don't see a big difference.
There's a big difference. There is a big difference actually, but they start talking about like the monadism and this.
Well, that's actually, I think it's an idea of Leibniz, isn't it?
But I think it got garnered from them, and it gets into this. There's like one of the we are awake and aware of reality for 2/3 of our existence, and the other third we're asleep. Right. So that sleep part is really interesting. What happens there? The mechanistic people will say, "Oh, well, you're just, this is it's necessary to, resolve this chemical process, and things get resolved, and then you're awake and you're refreshed. It's something that's just a mechanism. But there's an idea that that you go to another place. There's another existence. You have a third of your life is another existence that you're not aware of in the waking world. This is a very compelling idea to me. What is that other third? And there's been a lot of mystics that have talked about it, and equalizing that thing, and Rudolf Steiner particularly talks quite a bit about it. And so anyway, what is that existence, and where is that existence, and what is it about, and how does it relate to our waking materialistic perception of reality?
Well, I would say there's well, again, that this is only one of the possible ideas. I, for example, think that during sleep, nothing fundamentally different happens from your waking processes. Like, basically, and it actually helps to understand how you process the information when you're awake. And it's kind of I think I took this idea from Nietzsche, that fundamentally during your sleep, your perception operates in the very same way as when you're awake. It's just you receive some input, basically, like your senses and whatever receive some input, and you basically, how do you say it, like invent a reason, like a possible reason for that input, like like, for example, when you're awake, you can see, well, it's sort of a classic example, a table in front of you, but what does that actually means? And I think the philosopher Berkeley talked a lot about that, is this table that you see in front of you, it's basically a sum of your perceptions, so you kind of invent this object based on the sum of your perceptions. Like, you can see it, you can knock on it, you can hear these knocks. I mean, you can touch it, you can feel the texture, you can lick it, I don't know, you can smell it, and so on.
Right.
And so you invent a reason for the sum of these perceptions. You say there is a table, and the table is a reason that I'm feeling all that. But there is really no table. Well, in a way there is, but the point is that the process of perception kind of works backwards. It kind of tricks you. And it, by the way, it relates a lot to magic, because what magic is, I mean, this hocus pocus type magic. It's basically the magician, the illusionist, he makes you believe that the causality is different. Like, he makes you believe that the objects you see exist, but they might be just illusions. Like your senses invent these objects where they are not there in the first place, or vice versa. You might not see the objects that are there, and that's kind of this manipulation of human perception of causality is what gives rise to these all these magic tricks and so on.
Right.
But you do that all the time with yourself. I mean,
definitely.
My point
it's
is
very frustrating.
But my point is that during sleep, the very same thing happens. It's just that you're not constrained really by, kind of like your mind is just generating all these images, kind of,
that's
really
that's
wildly.
Dreaming, but dreaming is only a small part of the sleep.
But yeah, definitely. But if you're not seeing anything, well, there's just nothing in there. Well, I mean, what's there to talk about?
This is, I mean, I've been exposed to this stuff, but just recently, like the ideas about this, the astral projection and all that stuff, what for like the Dogon, right? That tribe, that's been an interesting one to kind of take a look at, because they knew of these, for instance, that you know more about this than I do, but the dual star nature of Sirius, that thing, they knew about that, before we discovered it. How did that happen?
Well, I don't know. I
Pretty
mean,
intriguing.
maybe sometime in the past they were separated to a larger extent or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.